Please make welcome Dr. Brad Wheeler.
Well, Ian, thank you very much. A freezing winter there. It must be down to what, about 30 or 35 there in the Gold Coast, something like that would be my guess. I think the Indiana summer that we're having right now may be more akin to some of your weather in the north. We have record temperatures in the triple digits on the Fahrenheit scale. And us Hoosiers aren't exactly used to that during the summer. It's a little toasty for us, and so we're adjusting to it. I had the good fortune to be down in Australia just back in March, helping with the review there at Griffith, and is always one of my favorite places to visit. I've been down there many times for various opportunities with universities. But this time when Ian rang me up and asked about it, I was delighted to work out this arrangement with no jet lag or air miles involved. So as you see the slides going behind me, don't worry that if they don't seem to match exactly what I'm saying. I decided for the talk this morning just to have a lot of headlines rolling by. These may be some headlines you've seen in the Chronicle of Higher Education, or if you pick up some of the international papers or the New York Times. This is a topic that is deeply on the mind of every president, provost, chancellor, and trustee of universities here in the United States. I'll also ask for just a brief indulgence if I fail to properly translate everything amongst the Australian context and the U.S. context, that Ian gave me permission to talk a little bit about what I see and hear going on in the United States. With all of this chatter that we hear about MOOCs and online education and new business models and startup companies, so the question really becomes, is this time different? I suspect many of you in the audience, and certainly for me, this is not the first time that we've heard the storyline that the university is toast, that new business models and technology, a variety of things were going to render us dinosaurs and obsolete, and finally expose the inefficiencies that are that bundle of capabilities called the university. Well, it bears fair scrutiny because decision makers, we're always having to look and understand, are those little subtle, faint signals that we're hearing out there on the horizon, is that telling us something really, really important is coming? Or are they just glaring gong and cymbals and a kind of an echo chamber of reporters writing the same thing over and over and fools chasing gold, that there's no real there? So I begin with an example in that in 1988, the United States government granted a patent on something that ultimately became important. In 1942, when no one had heard of this, 42, did you hear me say that? About 50 years later, a second patent was granted on something that was fairly important. You didn't hear much more about this thing until you got a glimpse of it in Stanley Kubrick's famous movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, when this was held up. Through the 1980s and early 1990s, companies named as Pensep, Fujitsu, Go, NCR, Apple, Microsoft, IBM, AT&T, Wang, Digital Equipment Corporation, Nokia, Samsung, HP, and Asus all spent millions upon tens of millions of dollars chasing an idea that had been around for a great amount of time. And then in 2010, Apple introduced the iPad and changed the world. So based on thoughts and ideas going back to an 1888 patent and then a 1942 patent, and then 25 years of tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars poured into an idea where nothing substantial of market capability evolved. Apple, at the right moment, at the right time, got all the right hits on the slot machine, and money just poured out. So as we think about this notion of online education and new models, that the press is just all abuzz, is this time different? And if it is, how would we know? Now, even in our most recent memory, there are some pretty glaring examples that give us pause. Here locally in Bloomington, Indiana, and in Chicago, I recall as a business professor teaching MBAs in the late 90s when the dot-com frenzy was going on, there was a company here called unext.com. We're going to educate you next by using the internet and taking lessons to you and revolutionize the university. That company has now been sold 3 times and is now in a minor content consulting role today. In the early 2000s, Columbia University invested millions of dollars in Fathom to go online. The University of Illinois in the mid-1990s created the Illinois Global Campus, much to the consternation of some of their faculty. And neither has proven right just yet. In time, Columbia closed Fathom, and the quote was, "The decision reflects the belief that having invested really meaningful resources into Fathom, at this point, the university is going to be better served if we focus those resources on campus-based initiatives." So I do urge just a little bit of pause as we hear all of these things going around, but I also encourage an eyes wide open to think about what really might be happening right now. So what are the motivations that even as fireflies that draw us to this flame? Ian invited me to talk about this. It's been in every conversation I've been in. I'm with my president tomorrow morning with some of our campus leadership on a retreat to talk about this subject. So what is the flame that draws us here? Well, one might be the technology argument. We ought to change models, and we ought to do this because we can. The internet's here, people have browsers, we have PCs, broadband connectivity is growing, we can record lectures. We ought to just do this now because we can. A second argument might be the social argument, and that is our economies and our nations and our prosperity in the world, our place is increasingly dependent on an educated workforce that can have skills and education to compete in jobs that aren't necessarily mining or manual labor. I know mining's big there in Australia with many of your natural resources, but a knowledge economy. The third argument is maybe not because we should, the social argument, but because we must, the economic argument. The finance of our business and our customers, our clients, our students has fundamentally changed. Internationally, but certainly in the United States, we see a psychological shift in our government, and that is viewing higher education as a private good, not as a public good, that it is increasingly to be financed by the individual himself or herself. So one question that I ask as we see these things about massively open online courses and new business models and courses for free and edX and Coursera and such, are we really looking at an innovation that is a substitute for what we do? Meaning, people will pivot to that instead of to us? Or is this a complement? In The Road Ahead in 1995, Bill Gates wrote that many new technologies are first perceived to be substitutes for something that we already understand. In time, we often learn that those technologies and ideas may be complements to something that we already do, and we don't really stop doing what we did before. But sometimes we also find that the opposite is true. Something that we perceive as a bolt-on, a complement to what we already do, over time becomes a substitute. And we just stop using the other thing. I don't recall the last time I went to a physical travel agent. to arrange even a complex international trip. The internet has provided many, many substitutes. Now, there are moments when I might need that for a trip to a certain country, but by and large, you understand this difference between substitutes and complements. So if we think to the notion of our students who decide that they need to acquire higher education for whatever their motivation is, we can think a little bit of a full continuum of possibilities to acquire that education. For many of your cities and states where you're at, certainly here in Indiana University, we have tens of millions of volumes of knowledge in a big old building called the library. And just about anybody who wants can walk in there and at his or her convenience read from one shelf end to the next floor down to the other shelf end. So it is not rationed the knowledge and wisdom of the world that has been recorded as one means of learning for those who are inclined to do so. At the opposite end, we might find a more boutique model, and that is, what if I could just sit at the feet of Stephen Hawkins and have him explain the world to me? Or to the just departed here at Indiana University, our Nobel laureate who won the Nobel Prize, the first female to win the Nobel Prize in economics, Elinor Ostrom. Her understanding and research about the tragedy of the commons and proving that there really was no tragedy of the commons, that we actually did learn how to manage a commons. And to hear her lecture and to hear her talk, it can subsume a whole book of economics just in a day to spend with her and the clarity of thought of conveying those ideas. So in this continuum, where is your college or university positioned at one end of almost boutique services with great professors and non-substitutable experiences in growing up? As one person recently pointed out to me, they were not concerned about online education because parents would pay an extraordinary amount of money to remove 18-year-olds from their home so they could go and do other things. But where is your institution positioned from a fairly boutique end to doing something that is highly efficient and perhaps costs less, and at the end you get a credential for both of those experiences? So also along that continuum, as we think what our offers are, I'm a business school professor, and going to the market, what is it these students, professional students, further along in life, continuing education, coming back for graduate degrees, or coming in for undergraduate, what is it that they value in the offers? Well, one may be, based on their own ability, they want to get into the best school they can there in Australia because what they value is the credential. When you finish here at Indiana University, we stamp Indiana University on your backside, and you get to say that for the rest of your life. And that puts you in communication or contact with 500,000 living alumni, and it means something. It may be the cost of attending. It may be how long, the time it takes. It may be the societal perceived value of that credential at the end. We also face questions today as the world is shifting, and we start to see these new models of free and open and online courses. This notion of who pays is very much present. In the United States, our debt crisis of 2008, 2009, that I think we sneezed and the world caught a cold with the global financial crisis, many of the roots of that were in the housing sector here, a bubble in the housing sector, amongst other things. There are many here who believe there is a student debt bomb that is of the same magnitude here in the United States, particularly with the rise of for-profit institutions chasing student dollars, community colleges during the recession, pulling people into university or college programs, racking up student debt, who are not going to complete those programs, but yet will end up with a debt to follow and no means to pay for it. So this notion of who pays, as we shift here in the United States to a greater model of the student pays, or it's a cross-subsidy through scholarships and transfer payments, we start to see that when people pay themselves, they become more judicious consumers than when things are provided to them seemingly gratis or free of charge. So for universities, with this context of a range of offerings, the eyes through which students see those offerings, and then the pressure that they feel as a consumer buying a good, it causes us to think about our institution's capabilities and position in the industry. So we've been having a lot of conversations around here, and again, as a business school professor, I tend to look at things from an industry perspective, not necessarily from an Indiana University perspective, but where are our offerings of Indiana University and all that we do in the context of the industry of higher education. For us, it's the large public state universities, though we collaborate and work pretty hard to beat some students and grants out of very notable private universities as well. But I still find no better model in my mind to frame what we ought to be doing to ensure our well-being and carry out our mission than Michael Porter's classic 5 forces framework that describes an industry. Those of you who have suffered through business school, I saw who you were because there was a twitch in the audience. You kind of twitched in your chair just when I said that. But if we walk through those 5 forces and think about it just a little bit, the first one is buyer power. We see that we are very susceptible to changes in behavior of our student buyers. And that is, universities by and large are large fixed cost operations, particularly with faculty, with tenured faculty, with physical plant. Big swings in our enrollment base, and your funding model there, I understand, is somewhat different than here in the United States. But big swings in enrollment, if our students start choosing substitutes, the buyers have a lot of power. And that is a really important factor as we start to think about students who may be looking at alternatives. The second one that worries me greatly, and Ian heard a little bit of this there when I was down in the Gold Coast, and that is supplier power. So who are our suppliers? We know where our faculty come from, our labor markets and such. And right now we have the illusion that we even have a somewhat efficient market for materials that we use. Very few of your faculty write the complete book of Introduction to Chemistry. Pearson sells a chemistry book, McGraw-Hill, Wiley, several of them sell these books. And you don't need to do that. You can buy that book. You can direct your students to buy it. No big deal whatsoever. Some faculty will create notes and things that they sell. But what happens when our suppliers start to gain greater power and put a greater tax or encumbrance on our tuition? I think that starts to happen when the things that they know how to do cannot easily be imitated. And I think we're headed at that very fast right now. That is, it's not the textbooks or digital textbooks that are the concern. It's their ability to build all sorts of simulations and tutorials and the adaptive learning algorithms and analytics behind them. What if, we tell our students, you need to just go buy that online resource. It's only, $50 or it's $100 more. And then 5 years later, the price is $250. And you say, well, darn it. That's a big cost of attending education. That's too much. Well, it's not that a professor can go write a new book somewhere else, but they have 5 years of adaptive algorithm information in making that course more and more efficient to the point that it's almost a non-substitutable input. Number 3, so buyer power, supplier power, threat of new entrants. That's what much of our conversation is about today. In the United States, we saw the University of Phoenix, owned by the Apollo Group, come in, and we've understood that. We see Western Governors University come in that is competency-based, not credit hours-based for graduation. Today, we see Coursera, a company called Tutor, Udacity, new companies coming in that proffer to start offering substitutes. At the moment, we think that our credential will continue to differentiate us. But one of our very esteemed and extremely successful alumni, Mark Cuban, and it's in my slides rolling by, in Maverick blog, has written a fairly tart editorial about the state of higher ed and that our industry is ripe for disruption, and the people he wants to hire aren't necessarily the ones that have a university degree but that really have demonstrated certain skill sets. So buyer power, supplier power, threat of new entrants, substitutes, as we just mentioned there for a moment, people choosing to do different things than us. The credential is the insulation at the moment. And finally, just rivalry amongst ourselves. So when I look in conversations with my good friends at the University of Michigan, I was just with day before yesterday in Wisconsin or Virginia, we talk about how our offerings are going to evolve relative to these forces that are shaping the flow of students and money in the United States. The second lens, again, the business school guy that really strikes me is the more recent work by Clayton Christensen in The Innovator's Dilemma and his application of it to disrupting class. If you've not seen that article or the book that he put out from that. And the key point there is that industry incumbents who have a place and are generally comfortable, they often provide services that are either overpriced or go after unserved markets that they're not reaching, or are overserved. Their offerings are overbuilt. And people decide that substitutes are good enough. And we ignore them and we go, well, that's just the low end of the market. That's just a certificate. That's just online. That's not a real education. We're going to focus on the stuff that we do well. And then they gain a foothold, and then they leverage that up and leverage it up and leverage it up. So the Innovator's Dilemma and Porter's models together caused me to ask this question: is this time different? And if so, if I look at those models, what would they tell me? Is it that the technology is very different? Is it just the debt bomb that's causing this, and we could spend a bunch of money, and then when the debt thing settles down, maybe the economy recovers, we look like Columbia University with a big kind of goose egg for millions of dollars investment. So I'll go into a little editorializing now, and then we'll go to questions and dialogue with you. So if I answer this question, is this time different? My view is yes. Yes, I believe this time is different, and I believe it's because of the confluence of forces that are interacting together. So touching on those briefly, I think the economics of higher education, at least in the American context, are not sustainable as we see them right now. So we're seeing changes in state funding, the ability to roll in electricity costs or capital costs into rising tuition, which was carried by the government in some way with student debt. The economic side of that is quite serious. Now, here at Indiana University Bloomington, more than half of our graduates this past May graduated with zero student debt. But the whole industry is somewhat tarred by the challenges that we're seeing there. If the consumers economically ever start to see that the employers are hiring, or in their own perception gathering skills in other ways, has reached a good enough level, I think we have a bit of a crisis on our hands. The second one is societal, so economic and societal. I would describe this as I want it my way. We hear about inverted classes, we hear about lecture capture, we hear about time shifting, and the view was, some of us recall that we used to set our DVRs, or I'm sorry, let me back up, our videotape recorders. We would set it at 8 p.m. on Friday night because our favorite show was going to come on, and if I really date myself to a U.S. classic series, we wanted to find out who shot JR on Dallas. We didn't want to miss that particular episode. Well, that DVR gave way to, or I'm sorry, that video cassette recorder gave way to digital video recorders. And it learned what we liked, and it started recording things for us with TiVo and DVRs and things like that. Well, now, college students today, they don't care about any of that. That's all in the cloud. There's Netflix, there's Hulu, there's all these other services. It's our big communal DVR. And it's any media you want, anytime you want, on any device you want, anywhere you want. Except at your university. You have to sign up for that, 1 o'clock class on Tuesday and Thursday, lest you get that dog of a section at 8 a.m. on Friday. And that's your 2 offerings. And so you see the mismatch between how we're framing the world that we're offering and their experience in everything else in life. So economic, societal, cultural. I've mentioned this before. If culture starts to value skills and abilities in ways that are credentialed, other than through badges, other than what we do, I think that's the third leg of the stool. And finally, the fourth one is technological. It's not crappy video anymore, and I hope you're not seeing crappy video over this. It's high definition. It's good video. It's on demand. It's in the cloud. It even changes. You miss the problem twice, it routes you through some remedial stuff until you get it right. You get 3 in a row right, it doesn't bore you. It jumps ahead to better stuff. So you don't have to waste your time over those 3 lectures that you learned in high school, but yet that is the pace of Professor Grumpy today. Being Professor Grumpy myself, I can say that. So the ability of this, I want it my way, and the technology enabling that, I think those are 4 things that cause this time to be different. So we're left to that final question, and that really is, okay, but is it different that matters for 2012? Or do those forces come together that in 2016 something really happens? When does this shift to some of the things that we've talked about in the development of substitutes that worry us, or we learn how to graft on the complements of these developments of Khan Academy and time-shifting videos? Well, I think it's probably not as soon as the chicken with the head cut off press is running around screaming about right now. But I do think it takes some time to build capability to do this. If Ian were to be convinced that, oh my goodness, beginning in the 2013 time, Griffith is going to abandon its campuses and all faculty need to teach online. Well, first off, he would be immediately replaced, and correctly so. But if he decided that he wanted to do that, how fast could he pivot his faculty, his capabilities, to be able to do that? It would be some long run. I've been through multiple years myself. I started as the Associate Dean for Teaching and Learning Technologies across all 8 campuses. So I understand the notion of trying to steer the big battleship to make a turn. It takes a little bit of time to get her around the corner. So what to do now? My guidance, I'll offer 4 things. 1, I would encourage engaging in purposeful pilot trials right now. Some of this is experiential, and you've got to learn for yourself. You've all got some of those faculty who are those guys out there and ladies who just jump out ahead. Well, find a few of those. Find out how to take what they're kind of doing on the side or the down low, or they're getting some kind of a little recognition in their department. How do you harness that to actually learn? Is it faculty learning communities, some graft? You pay off a few of the faculty to participate in this together. Is there some prize offered for example, ask 3 faculty or propose to your institution? Faculty, bring forth the most compelling proposal that you can that will reduce the cost of delivery to a multi-sequence course, like the first section and then the second section, and improve student learning. Do you incent your faculty to come in with something that helps you go after the economics and the learning and run it as some kind of a competition? So purposeful pilots. The reason for purposeful pilots is number 2, and that is to begin building capabilities of knowing how to do things. If we don't know how to do things, how to run a massively open online course that's not just a fraud and devalues our brand, but rather enhances our brand, because if your institution is particularly good at bioinformatics, you decide to run a massively open course around the world for bioinformaticians, and you draw lots of people in, you don't want them to be disappointed, or you're tarring your brand. But you would like to learn how to build some capabilities of doing the next one. I would say try to build those capabilities in areas where you already have some competence, not in just a general intro to political science, which might be undifferentiated amongst your institutions, but possibly not. Number 3, and very important, my view is cut no long-term deals right now. I actually believe some of our good friends and colleagues at some very notable institutions may be giving away the farm with their brand and cutting some deals with some of the startups in the way they're going. Now, many of these have easy exit and walk-away clauses. That's very, very important. But I do worry that some of these deals will not go well over time. The exits may be very, very difficult to back out of, and their brands may be tied up in ways that are unhealthy. And finally, and related to that, is respect your brand. In an online world, which are blended world, resident and online, you want to peer with other institutions or other notable firms, or peer up. I think managing your brand is very, very essential in how you do this. You notice one thing I didn't mention in passing. For at least 15 years or more, since the dawn of the commercial internet, we've seen these companies, the capitalist model comes in and says, we can fix the university. We know how to do this better. We can manage cost. We can do satisfaction. We can adapt better than you can. But you notice what's different this time from the last 2 times that they did that? They're not coming in saying, we're going to blow you away, you next, and we're going to do it on our own. They're coming in partnered. They're partnered with the University of Southern California, with Michigan, with Stanford, with Virginia, with lots of these very notable firms. Harvard and MIT going together in edX. These are partnered ventures, because notice they're preserving brand and bringing capability. They're not trying to do pure substitutes as the capitalists did the first couple of times on the way in. So as you go forward, back to purposeful pilots, I encourage some dabbling. Learn, try some things, be intentional, be strategic with a purpose. I would avoid a little bit of the me too. If you don't know why you're doing it, there's a little of that going on right now, but engage in dabbling. And at some point, there will be a time to make a bet on some of these things. Niche markets seem most likely to be profitable for many of our institutions. And when I say profitable, I mean they don't lose money for our institutions, where we have to rob other programs to prop them up. I will share a personal example here in closing, and that is our own business school at Indiana University called the Kelley School of Business. I taught in the MBA program, which was the cash cow. It was a 300-student, highly competitive, top 20 national MBA program here in the United States. In the late 90s, there was a desire to create an online version of that. And it was literally done over almost the dead bodies of some of the incumbent faculty. In starting that up, the dean was very shrewd in how he did it. So now we fast forward 13 years, and I think the program absolutely and unequivocally saved the school. They went into the market. They went after targeted areas. They kept the standards up. They actually premium priced the experience, not discounted it. It was the same faculty as taught in the residential program. It's now proliferated into 3 or 4 more Masters of Science programs. The residential MBA program is about 50 to 60% the size that it was at one point in time. So that was one where they gradually built the capabilities and got it right. Ian, I've talked longer than I intended. I would be happy to go to some questions from the audience and talk more about what's going on here in the conversations I'm involved in.
Thanks very much, Brad. So we might open it up for questions. If you can signal if you want to ask a question, and you do need to speak into the microphone. So are there any questions in the audience? Yes, Professor Sue Spence from Griffith. Hopefully you'll see.
Yep. Can you hear me all right, Brad? Yep. Hi.
I can indeed. I even recognize you.
Great talk. Thank you very much. Really, really interesting. I just wanted to ask a question about these, the MOOCs, and their free open courseware. I'm wondering how sustainable they are in the long term. I mean, they're very exciting right now, but I've enrolled in one of these, and mostly to find out what it was like through Coursera. And my course has just been delayed because they can't actually get it up and running in time. So it does seem that with these there are issues. What's your view on their sustainability?
You know, I was an assistant professor and teaching electronic commerce, really with the dawn of the commercial internet through the mid to late 1990s and into 2000s. And what we observed time and time and time again is a business model that loses money on every sale but makes it up on volume never worked over time. And so the sustainability of these things is yet to be seen. Now, what we don't have right now that they may tap into, if they, Coursera and Udacity, if they learn to tap into other revenue rather than a metered model of I'm consuming credit hours, so I'm going to pay you for those credit hours. If they can find a subsidy model such that there is enough advertising going on around there that would prop that up, or I'm one of those guys that I take an open MOOC and I am the smartest kid you have ever seen from Uzbekistan. So we get this guy all the way through, and somewhere along the way he signs an agreement with me, and I have no idea what jurisdiction it would be enforced in, but let's say we do this deal, that I have the rights to, place him. And I got companies wanting to buy this because I've looked across the whole world. The joke is with our good friends at the Harvard Business School that, many companies are buying their admissions work. They just hope they didn't damage them in the 2 years they were in the MBA program there. And so I'm just a little bit tongue-in-cheek with that. But you see what I mean? If they can monetize a model that draws on revenue sources other than consumer pays, there may be something there. But we've seen countless businesses go down chasing ad dollars, and it has typically been almost a winner-takes-all kind of market. Google's gotten huge, Facebook's gotten huge, many others that have chased scale, particularly in something that doesn't scale very well. You might be brilliant at a history course, and you want to teach, intro to philosophy, we'll start all over. That doesn't scale immediately other than, some technologies underneath it. So I share your great caution with this until we see these things sort out a bit more. You might jump into the MOOCs right now, though, if they are brand amplifiers. So, for example, here at Indiana University, we have a fantastic music school, the Jacobs School of Music, renowned, fantastic. It may be worthwhile taking an intro music theory class and teaching it to the world for free just to amplify the Jacobs brand and draw more in. That would be worth subsidizing.
Barney Glover.
Brad, can I also say, Barney Glover, I'm the Vice-Chancellor at Charles Darwin University in the Northern Territory in Australia. Thank you for the talk. It's very, very interesting and wonderful to see the insight out of the US. Our institution is significantly involved in online delivery. So for us, a lot of the things you're saying particularly resonate. But I wanted to just tease out a little bit more. If I'm interpreting you right, you're giving us a very, I think, appropriately cautious view of the emerging trends in the United States and caution about how to maximise the value to an organisation from engaging in significantly in the online space. And you almost seem to be suggesting that the emergent strength will be a complementary model, as you put it, an on-campus and institution with a great history, with an online, vibrant online component, and those two working together being the most effective or at least the most appropriate future. If we were to look out 4 or 5 years, because the technology is developing so rapidly, is that what you see as being the most likely success scenario for higher education adopting technology?
You know, I think I would differentiate slightly between undergraduate education and graduate program education. So I do think the blended model is going to be very, very important, and that blended model may surprise us that it sometimes works the opposite of what we think. It very well could be students sitting here in Bloomington, Indiana, taking a residential course or two, but at the same time choosing to take a course that might be a 100% all online course. They just happen to be sitting here while they're doing other things. Or it very well could be a course, as you described, that may have a residential component, an online component, and maybe wrap up with something residential. So for the undergrad, I see kind of a full slider, but I do think helping 18-year-olds become closer to not 18-year-olds in their brain. You know, there is some value for many students of a residential community experience, even if that's not 4 years or 3 years, some part of that. For the graduate degrees, the opportunity cost is much higher to pull out of your work life and go do something professional school. So it does seem to me that the slider probably can go a bit further on the online for graduate programs that may still have some residential component. But we're seeing a lot of success in graduate programs at a distance, and in particular, our own experience is those are sometimes just amazing groups of students, because it's often the overachievers who jump into those programs anyway, and they build networks for life. So my answer is yes, but I would segment just a little bit in where that slider is between graduate and undergraduate in our experience.
So there's time for one last question, just there.
Thanks very much for your presentation. I'm Sandra Dunn from Charles Darwin University and following up my VC. You've had experience here in Australia. You're very aware, I'm sure, that there's a difference in the tertiary education sector between Australia and the United States, both in terms of the funding environment, the political environment, but also the audience, your students, the groups that are going to be taking higher education opportunities. How would you modify, or would you modify, what you've said in relation to the environment in the United States for application here in Australia?
So I think, I appreciate the question very much. I think some part of this moving forward is a game of scale, because one thing about the internet, and it commoditizes distribution. So if you build something really, really, really fantastic, you can distribute it to many places really, really well. Now, I could go build a spider that searches and indexes websites and all, and I could build one and I can make it available to all of you. The distribution platform is out there. But for me to unseat Google, not going to happen. Microsoft can't unseat Google. Yeah, Google's not even aware of Yahoo anymore. I mean, some of these things are games of scale, because the capital cost and the depth of the expertise to build that thing. So we see some things going on in the United States with Carnegie Mellon University and their Open Learning Initiative, where they've been building these adaptive learning algorithms, some recent work. If you saw the study out of Ithaca, spelled with a K, fully randomized, controlled study, 6 or 8 universities involved, and they demonstrated no significant differences in residential students learning and students who took the online tutor. And you know the tutor has a lower cost per credit hour after you refine that thing a little bit. So now to your question and why that context matters. The United States and our good friends in Britain, or you guys in Australia, Commonwealth, I guess we could say for some of the Commonwealth countries, we look across the pond with envy of, dear God, when you guys ultimately do need to make a decision, somewhere up the political ladder, maybe somebody's capable of doing it. And that they're actually, I know, hey, realize the baseline is the U.S. Congress. So you have to calibrate, understand where the metrics are in this. But you guys, at least, there can be funding allocated either through the federal system or the state system there that provides incentives and steers in certain ways. If they want to, they really can use the money as the cheese to pull things in a certain direction, or hopefully capitalize something that many of you could benefit from if you would agree to do so. In the United States, there is no such authority anywhere at any level down to the dog catchers. So that means if we want to get our colleges and universities to pool money to do something together that is beyond the capital cost of one of us doing it ourselves, I mean, it is a monkey, an organ grinder, and a tin cup going around trying to round up money and get buy-in from it. Now, some would argue that if you do get those institutions to buy in, they may have a greater stake in the outcome of getting it there than when the money comes down, maybe in our context, from the National Sciences Foundation. But creating Sakai, some of you are users of Sakai, many of you are users of Moodle there in Australia. You know, rounding up the resources to do that was incredibly hard, even for Martin Dugiamas and how it started there, or Sakai itself. However, think how much money you guys all individually spend to Oracle or SunGard, PeopleSoft, to Blackboard, to Desire to Learn. You can pay those invoices and pool the money that way. But what is your means to self-coordinate amongst each other to roll up and capitalize development of things that you could all, excuse me, that you could all share back? I think your model, as perhaps frustrated as you are with it sometimes, has far greater promise than our own to do such things.
Thanks, Brad. Look, we might bring this session to a conclusion. It's actually, I mean, I'm particularly pleased that the technology has worked. It's actually provided us with an opportunity to engage with one of the leaders in this field, to engage in a conversation. Brad, thank you very much for the effort that you put into your presentation. Thank you very much for making the time available in your evening to actually do this presentation to the colleagues here. We look forward to continuing the discussion, and we look forward to seeing you physically back in Australia in the not too distant future. So if you could all join with me in showing your appreciation.
Thank you guys, and let me offer thanks to my helpers here who are running the cameras and made all this magic actually work, and to your technicians on the other end. Ian, Sue, other colleagues down there, I'll hope to see you on your end of the world sometime soon.
Thanks very much, Brad.